My own son toasted to my senility at my 70th birthday, handing me a brochure for a nursing home while his wife smirked. He forgot one thing. I still own the bank that holds his mortgage. If you believe respect is earned and karma is real, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss this. My name is Evelyn Vance, and for 40 years I've been known in Napa Valley not as a grandmother who bakes cookies, but as the iron fist inside a velvet glove that turned a patch of dry dirt into Vance Vineyards, a multi-million-dollar wine empire. I buried my husband, Richard, 10 years ago. He was a good man, but soft. I was the one who negotiated the distribution deals, I was the one who fired incompetent managers, and I was the one who ensured our label was on every top-shelf menu from New York to Tokyo. Since Richard passed, my entire universe revolved around my only son, Marcus. I gave him everything. Private schools, a shiny MBA, a VP position he wasn't qualified for, and a lifestyle that would make a Hollywood star blush. I thought I was setting him up for success. I didn't realize I was funding my own execution. The night of my 70th birthday was supposed to be a celebration of my legacy. The estate was lit up like the 4th of July. I had spent over 50 grand on the catering alone. Lobster flown in from Maine, truffles from Italy, and of course, endless bottles of our prize-winning Cabernet. I stood on the balcony of the main house, looking down at the guests mingling by the pool. Senators, tech moguls, and local elites were all there, sipping my wine and laughing. It felt like a triumph. But looking back, I should have noticed the sharks circling in the water. Marcus arrived late, which was typical. He walked in with his wife, Tiffany, clinging to his arm like a cheap bracelet. Tiffany was a piece of work. She was 20 years younger than him, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and an obsession with my jewelry collection that she barely tried to hide. From the moment they got married, she had been whispering in Marcus's ear, driving a wedge between us. She treated the vineyard not as a business that required blood and sweat, but as her personal ATM. Tonight, she was wearing a dress that cost more than my first house, and she was looking at my guests with a hungry expression, as if she were calculating the net worth of the room. "Happy birthday, Mother!" Marcus bellowed, his voice already a little too loud, his face flushed. He planted a wet, cursory kiss on my cheek. "You look tired." "Doesn't she look tired, Tiff?" "Exhausted," Tiffany chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You really need to slow down, Evelyn. At your age, all this stress is a ticking bomb time." I brushed them off with a polite smile. "I feel fantastic, actually. The 2018 vintage is finally ready for tasting. I'm going to announce the expansion into the European market tonight." Marcus and Tiffany exchanged a look. It was a quick, sharp glance, like two conspirators realizing their timeline had just moved up. I ignored it, blaming my paranoia. I moved through the party, shaking hands, accepting compliments, feeling the pride of a life well lived. But every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw them in a corner, whispering intensely with our family lawyer, a man named Greg, who I had hired straight out of law school. That should have been my second red flag. When the time came for the speeches, the music died down. I stood near the head of the long banquet table, holding a glass of champagne, ready to thank everyone. But before I could speak, Marcus grabbed the microphone. He tapped it aggressively, the feedback screeching through the speakers and silencing the crowd. "Excuse me, everyone, if I could have your attention," Marcus shouted, beaming with a confidence I hadn't seen in him in years. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating my mother's 70 years on this earth. It's about looking to the future, the Vance legacy." I smiled, expecting a touching tribute. Maybe a story about how she taught me to ride a bike, or the first time she took me to the harvest. Instead, Marcus's expression shifted into something somber, almost pitiable. "We all love Evelyn," he continued, looking at the floor and then back at the crowd. But those of us closest to her have noticed changes, the memory slips, the confusion. Running a business of this magnitude is a young man's game, and frankly, it's becoming dangerous for her health. We can't stand by and watch her deteriorate. My blood ran cold. Confusion? I was sharper than he had ever been on his best day. I started to step forward. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" He held up a hand to stop me, practically treating me like a confused child. "It's okay, Mom. You don't have to fight it anymore." Tiffany and I have made a decision out of love. We are officially taking over operations of Vance Vineyards effective tomorrow. And for you, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a glossy brochure. He walked over and placed it in my trembling hands in front of 200 guests. I looked down. The cover read, Golden Oaks Assisted Living, Premier Memory Care. "We've booked you the presidential suite," Tiffany said, stepping up beside him, her voice loud enough for the back row to hear. "It's fully staffed. You won't have to lift a finger. We're moving into the main estate next week to manage things on site. It's for the best, Evelyn. You need professional help." The silence in the garden was deafening. My friends, my business partners, people I had known for decades, were staring at me with a mix of pity and horror. Marcus had painted a picture of a senile old woman losing her mind, and by handing me that brochure in public, he had sealed the narrative. If I screamed, I'd look crazy. If I cried, I'd look weak. "I am not going to a home," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely suppress. "This is my house. This is my company." "Actually, Mom," he said to voice, dropping to a patronizing whisper that the microphone still picked up. "We activated the competency clause in the trust Dad set up. Greg signed off on it this morning. You're legally incapacitated as of noon today. It's done." I looked at Greg, my lawyer. He refused to meet my eyes, swirling his drink and looking at his shoes. They had staged a coup. My own son had staged a hostile takeover of my life at my birthday party. Tiffany placed a hand on my shoulder, her nails digging into my silk dress. "Don't make a scene, Evelyn. It's embarrassing. Just enjoy the cake and we'll have the movers pack your things on Monday. I've already got a decorator coming to redo the master bedroom. That dreadful wallpaper has to go." The audacity was physical. It felt like a slap across the face. I looked around the circle of faces. I saw the smirks on a few of the younger wives who envied my position. I saw the shock on my old friends' faces. But mostly, I saw the triumph in my son's eyes. He didn't see a mother. He saw an obstacle to his inheritance that he had just successfully removed. He thought he had won. He thought the competency clause was the final nail in my coffin. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I didn't throw the wine in his face. I didn't scream. I simply set the brochure on the table, turned my back on him, and walked toward the house with my head held high. Mom, where are you going?" Marcus called out, sounding annoyed that I wasn't playing the part of the grateful, confused invalid. I didn't answer. I walked straight through the French doors, past the servers who looked terrified, and into my private study. I locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the adrenaline of pure, unadulterated fury. I walked to the window and watched them down there. Marcus toasting with Greg, Tiffany laughing and pointing up at my balcony, probably planning which drapes she was going to buy with my money. They thought they had covered every base. They thought Richard's old trust fund was the only leverage in play. But Marcus was lazy. He never read the fine print, and he certainly didn't know about the separate holding company I had established 5 years ago, an entity that technically owned the land the vineyard stood on, distinct from the operating business. I sat down at my mahogany desk, the same desk where I had built this empire while Marcus was still in diapers. I pulled out my private ledger and my secure phone. I wasn't going to a nursing home. I was going to war. I wiped one single tear from my cheek, the last tear I would ever shed for my son, and dialed the number of the only shark in town hungrier than Greg. Hello, this is Evelyn Vance. I need to liquidate some assets and call in some loans. Immediately. Yes, tonight. I'm about to teach a very expensive lesson about reading the fine print. The sound of packing tape ripping off the dispenser is a noise I will never forget. It sounded like bones breaking. The morning after my 70th birthday, the sun rose over Napa Valley with a cruel, golden brilliance, illuminating the absolute wreckage of my life. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night in my study, backing up files to an external hard drive and shredding documents that Marcus didn't need to see. By 8 a.m., a moving crew hired by my daughter-in-law was already swarming my master bedroom, boxing up 40 years of memories as if they were trash at a flea market. I stood in the doorway, watching a young mover with a neck tattoo carelessly handle a porcelain vase Richard had bought me in Paris. He wrapped it in a single sheet of paper and tossed it into a cardboard box marked Misc. "Careful with that," I said, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. "We got it, lady. Chill," the boy grunted, not even looking at me. "Let them work, Evelyn," Tiffany's voice floated down the hallway. She appeared wearing a white silk robe that I recognized. It was a gift I had received from a client in Tokyo, never opened. She had raided my closet before I had even left the premises. She was holding a green juice, looking around my hallway with a critical sneer. Honestly, this whole wing needs a gut renovation. It's giving 1980s funeral home vibes. I'm thinking open concept, skylights, maybe knock down that wall to the library. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. That library was where I taught Marcus to read. "You aren't knocking down anything, Tiffany. This is a historic estate." She took a sip of her juice and smiled, a predator showing her teeth. "Actually, sweetie, it's our estate now. Marcus signed the deed transfer authorization an hour ago. You're just a guest until the car arrives to take you to Golden Oaks. Speaking of which, did you pack your meds? I heard they get cranky if you check in without your prescriptions." Marcus walked out of the bedroom then, looking like he hadn't slept either, though for different reasons. He avoided my gaze, focusing intently on his tablet. "The car is here, Mom. It's a private medical transport. Very comfortable. They'll take you right to your suite." "I don't need a medical transport, Marcus. I can drive," I stated, walking past him toward the staircase. "We confiscated your keys, Mom," Marcus said softly, finally looking at me. His eyes were pleading, begging me to just make this easy for him so he didn't have to feel like the monster he was. Greg advised it, for liability reasons. If you drove and had an episode, the company could be sued. "An episode?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The only episode happening here is a tragedy of greed." "Fine, I'll take the transport." I didn't say goodbye to my son. I didn't hug my son. I simply walked out the front door of the house I built, past the rose bushes I planted, and climbed into the back of the black van waiting in the driveway. As we pulled away, I saw Tiffany in the window, waving her fingers in a mocking goodbye. She thought she was waving at a defeated old woman. She didn't know she was waving at a detonator. "Where to, ma'am? Golden Oaks?" "No," I said, pulling a thick envelope of cash from my purse, money I had stashed in the safe years ago for emergencies. "Drive me to the St. Regis in San Francisco. And if you tell anyone you dropped me there, I'll sue you for kidnapping. If you keep your mouth shut, there's another $500 in it for you." The driver looked at the cash, then at me in the rearview mirror. He grinned. "St. Regis it is. I never saw you, lady." 2 hours later, I was checking into a suite overlooking the city. I didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of the bed and dialed a number. "Thorne," a deep voice answered. "It's done. They kicked me out." Marcus triggered the competency clause. Silas Thorne was the kind of lawyer that made other lawyers cross the street to avoid him. He didn't care about justice, he cared about winning. I had kept him on a retainer for 5 years, unbeknownst to Greg or anyone at the vineyard, specifically for a doomsday scenario like this. "I'm assuming you want to go nuclear?" Silas asked. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Scorched earth, Silas. Start with the accounts." "With pleasure. By the way, I reviewed the operating agreement for Vance Vineyards, Inc. again this morning. Your son and his budget lawyer missed a massive, very expensive detail. The business entity, the one they just stole from you, doesn't own the land or the facilities. They just own the brand and the distribution rights." "Correct," I said, walking to the window. "Vance Land Holdings LLC owns the dirt, the vines, the processing facility, and the mansion. And Vance Land Holdings is owned 100% by me, with no competency clause attached because it's a private asset holding, not an operating company." "And," Silas continued, "the lease agreement between the vineyard and the landholding has a change of control provision. If you are removed as CEO of the vineyard, the lease terminates automatically and the rent resets to current market value immediately. Draft the eviction notice, but first, let's cut off the oxygen. How long until we can freeze the credit lines?" "I'm already at the bank, Evelyn. Since you are the personal guarantor for the vineyard's revolving credit line of $10 million and they just declared you incompetent, the bank is legally required to freeze the line to protect the guarantor. I just handed the branch manager the paperwork. Marcus is going to try to buy lunch in about 10 minutes, and he's going to have a very embarrassing problem." I hung up the phone and finally allowed myself to pour a drink from the hotel minibar. I imagined the scene back at the estate. At that very moment, in Napa, Marcus was likely sitting at my desk, feeling like a king. He was probably trying to authorize a wire transfer to pay for Tiffany's renovations, or perhaps ordering a new Porsche. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Silas. "Credit line frozen. Accounts locked pending guarantor review. It's live." I sat back and watched the clock. It took exactly 14 minutes. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Marcus. I ignored it. Then a text came through. "Mom, there's a mistake with the bank cards. Tiffany is at the design center trying to put a deposit on marble flooring and the card declined. Call me." I chuckled. He thought it was a glitch. He thought he could just call Mommy to fix it. I waited another hour. The texts became frantic. "Mom, seriously, pick up. The payroll account is frozen too. The harvest crew is waiting for their checks. Greg says the bank flagged the accounts because of the competency filing. We need you to sign a waiver." I finally picked up the phone, but I didn't call Marcus. I called the front desk of the St. Regis. "This is Evelyn Wance in Suite 404. I'd like to order a spa treatment, a massage, and please turn off the room phone. I don't want to be disturbed. I have a very busy week of destroying my enemies ahead of me." As I laid down on the massage table, I thought about the land lease. Marcus hadn't just bitten the hand that fed him, he had bitten the hand that owned the ground he stood on. Tomorrow he would receive a notice that his rent was going up by 400%, retroactive to this morning. And if he didn't pay, well, eviction is a terrible thing to happen to a new CEO. Monday morning rolled in, and I was enjoying the best room service Eggs Benedict I'd ever had, knowing my son was currently drowning in a tsunami of his own making. My phone had been blowing up since 9 a.m., 47 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from Tiffany, and 6 from Greg, the traitorous lawyer. I didn't answer a single one. I just sipped my mimosa and waited for the one call that actually mattered. At 10:15 a.m., my personal cell rang. It was Silas. "The eagle has landed," Silas said, his voice smooth as velvet. "I just left the administrative office. You should have seen their faces, Evelyn. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion." "Tell me everything," I said, putting my fork down. "Don't spare a single detail." "Well," Silas began, "I walked in right as Marcus was screaming at the payroll manager. Apparently, the checks for the harvest crew bounced this morning because the accounts are frozen. The workers are outside staging a walkout. Grapes are hanging on the vine, ready to be picked, and nobody is moving a muscle until they get paid. Good, I said. Let 'em sweat. What about the lease? That was the cherry on top. I handed Marcus the notice of lease termination and renegotiation. I explained that since the key man clause, you being the key man, was violated by your removal, the preferential lease agreement of $1 per year is null and void. I presented him with the new lease terms from Vanstwand Holdings, LLC. Did he cry? I asked. He turned a shade of purple I've never seen on a human being. When he saw the new monthly rent is set at market value, $250,000 a month, payable in advance, he actually threw a stapler at the wall. Greg tried to argue it, said it was extortion. I reminded him that it's standard commercial real estate law. It's their choice. Pay the rent or vacate the premises in 48 hours. I hung up the phone with a smile that could cut glass. They thought they were taking over a gold mine, but I had just handed them a grenade with the pin pulled. Around noon, I finally decided to answer the phone. It was Marcus. "Mom, thank God!" he screamed the moment I picked up. He sounded breathless, frantic. "You have to stop this. Silas Thorne was just here. He's saying we owe $250,000 in rent? That's insane. We don't have that kind of liquidity, especially with the accounts frozen." "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "I'm confused. I thought I was incompetent. Surely an incompetent old woman couldn't possibly understand complex commercial lease agreements." "Stop it, Mom! This isn't a game," he yelled. "The pickers are walking off the job. If we don't get the Pinot Noir grapes in by Wednesday, the entire crop is ruined. That's millions of dollars down the drain. You're burning your own legacy just to spite me." "Correction," I interrupted, my voice dropped an octave. "I am protecting my assets. You and your wife decided I wasn't fit to run the company. Fine. If I'm not running the company, then the company doesn't get favors from me. The land belongs to me, Marcus. If you want to play big business CEO, then pay your bills like a big boy." "We can't pay," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The bank won't release the funds until they finish their investigation into the competency claim, which could take weeks. We are paralyzed." "That sounds like a you problem. Maybe you should ask Tiffany to pawn some of her jewelry. I hear diamonds have decent resale value." "Mom, please." "You have 48 hours to pay the first month's rent or I'm initiating eviction proceedings with the sheriff. And Marcus, don't try to harvest my grapes. Until that rent is paid, anything growing on that soil is property of the landlord. If I see one grape picked, I'll have you arrested for theft." I hung up the phone and turned it off again. The power rush was intoxicating, but I knew Tiffany. She wouldn't take this lying down. Marcus was a coward, but Tiffany was a survivor, like a cockroach. She would try to find a back door. My suspicion was confirmed later that afternoon. I received a text from Carlos, my vineyard foreman. Carlos was a man I had hired 20 years ago when he was down on his luck. He was loyal to the bone. "Senora Evelyn, the wife is in the warehouse. She is loading cases of the 2015 Grand Reserve into her Range Rover. She says she is taking them to a private buyer to raise cash for payroll. What should I do?" The 2015 Grand Reserve, my masterpiece, bottles that sold for $5,000 apiece. There were only 50 cases left in existence. Tiffany was trying to liquidate my liquid gold on the black market to save her own skin. I texted back, "Block the gate, do not let her leave. I'm sending the police." I dialed the local station. The sheriff, Jim Miller, was an old friend who I played poker with on Tuesdays. "Jim, it's Evelyn. I have an intruder at the winery stealing high-value inventory. Yes, it's a family member, but they are unauthorized. I want to press charges. Send a squad car now." I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to miss this. I called a cab and headed back to the valley. When I arrived at the vineyard gates, it was chaos. 2 squad cars were flashing their lights. Carlos had parked a tractor in front of the main gate, blocking the exit. Tiffany's white Range Rover was idling aggressively, and she was screaming at the deputies, flailing her arms like a banshee. "This is my wine! My husband owns this company!" she shrieked, looking like a disheveled mess.
Her perfect hair was frizzy and her mascara was running. I stepped out of the taxi, adjusting my sunglasses. The deputy saw me and tipped their hats. "Afternoon, Ms. Vance." "Officer," I nodded. I walked up to Tiffany's window. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You witch! We're trying to save the company you're destroying." "You're trying to fence stolen property," I corrected. "Officer, that wine is collateral for the business loans. Removing it without bank authorization is federal fraud. And since I am the guarantor of those loans, she is stealing from me." The deputy looked at Tiffany. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." "You can't be serious," she screamed. "Marcus, call Marcus." Marcus came running out of the main office, looking pale and sweaty. When he saw me, he froze. He saw his wife being handcuffed, he saw the tractor blocking the gate, and he saw his mother standing there, looking like the CEO he wished he could be. "Mom, tell them to stop," Marcus begged, running over. "She was just trying to help." "She's going to jail, Marcus," I said coldly. "Unless..." "Unless what? Anything!" "Unless you sign a confession," I said, pulling a folded document that Silas had emailed me earlier, admitting that you coerced me, that the competency claim was fraudulent, and that you resign as CEO effective immediately. You signed that, and I'll tell Jim it was a misunderstanding. You don't sign, and Tiffany spends the night in a cell and gets a felony record. Tiffany was pressed against the hood of the cod car, crying, "Sign it, Marcus! Sign the damn paper!" Marcus looked at the paper, then at his wife, then at me. He was shaking. He took the pen. But just as he was about to sign, a black sedan pulled up. A man in a sharp suit stepped out. It wasn't Greg. It was someone I didn't recognize. He walked over and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Don't sign anything, Mr. Vance," the stranger said. His voice was slick, dangerous. My name is Julian Black. I represent the investors who just bought your debt from the bank. We need to have a talk about management changes." I narrowed my eyes. Investors? Bought the debt? The bank had sold my loan behind my back? This wasn't just a family feud anymore. A shark had entered the tank, and he smelled blood.
The silence that followed Julian Black's declaration was heavier than a coffin lid. The flashing lights of the police cruisers reflected off his polished Italian shoes as he stood there, holding my life's work in a leather binder. "You're bluffing," Silas said, stepping forward, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "The land is held in a separate trust. It's untouchable." Julian chuckled, a dry sound like dead leaves scraping on pavement. He opened the binder and pulled out a document, holding it up for us to see. "Standard cross-collateralization clause, page 42 of the refinance agreement your son signed 6 months ago. When he leveraged the business to buy that ridiculous yacht, which I assume he told you was a distribution vessel, he put the land up as security. Since the business is now in default, I own the dirt. I own the vines. I own the air you're breathing, Ms. Vance." I looked at Marcus. He was white as a sheet, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Mom, Greg said it was just standard paperwork." "Greg?" I repeated, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I looked around for the family lawyer, but he was nowhere to be seen. He had set this up. He had guided Marcus into the trap, waited for the default, and then fed the carcass to this vulture, Julian Black. "Officer," Julian said, turning to the deputy, "as the legal owner of this property, I decline to press charges against Ms. Tiffany Vance. You can release her. However, I want these trespassers removed immediately." He pointed a manicured finger at me. "And that includes the former owner." Tiffany scrambled off the hood of the police car, rubbing her wrists. She ran to Marcus, burying her face in his chest, sobbing. "He almost had me arrested, Marcus. Do something." But Marcus couldn't do anything. He was staring at Julian with the realization of a man who had sold his soul for magic beans. "Mr. Black, surely we can work this out. I'm still the CEO. We can restructure." Julian looked at Marcus with pure disgust. "You? CEO? Kid, you couldn't run a lemonade stand. You're fired. Effective immediately." Get your things and get off my property. I'm bringing in my own management team tomorrow." "You can't do that," Tiffany shrieked, her entitlement flaring up again. "We live here." "Not anymore," Julian said, checking his watch. "I'll give you 24 hours to vacate the main house. After that, I change the locks." I didn't scream. I didn't fight the deputies when they politely asked me to step back. I just looked at Julian Black. "You think you've won, Mr. Black, but you bought a war, not a vineyard." "I love a good war, Evelyn," he smirked. "But you have no ammo left." I got back into the taxi, leaving my son and his wife standing in the dust, homeless and jobless, staring at the monster they had invited in. As we drove back to San Francisco, Silas was frantically typing on his laptop in the back seat. "It's bad, Evelyn," Silas muttered. "I'm looking at the filing. Julian Black represents Apex Capital. They're a liquidation firm. They don't run vineyards, they strip them. They'll sell the inventory, sell the equipment, bulldoze the vines, and sell the land to developers for condos. He's going to turn Vance Vineyards into a strip mall." My heart hammered against my ribs. My legacy, 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears, erased for a parking lot? "Is there a buyback clause?" I asked, staring out the window at the passing city lights. "Technically, yes," Silas said, hesitating. "Under California foreclosure laws, you have a statutory right of redemption. If you can pay off the full debt plus interest and penalties within 5 business days, you can nullify the sale." "How much?" "With the penalties and the accelerated loan balance, about $12 million. I laughed bitterly. My accounts are frozen. My assets are seized. I had about $40,000 in cash in my hotel safe. I needed $12 million in 5 days. "Find me a lender," I ordered. "Evelyn, with your credit frozen and a competency hearing pending, no bank will touch you. You're toxic." "I don't want a bank, Silas. I want a silent partner. Dig into Julian Black. Find out who he hates. Find out who his enemies are. Nobody gets that rich without making enemies." We spent the next 2 days in the hotel suite, turning it into a war room. Room service trays piled up. Silas worked the phones while I called every favor I was owed. But the old boys club had turned their backs on me. They heard dementia and bankruptcy, and suddenly everyone was in a meeting. On Wednesday night, the breakthrough didn't come from a high-powered contact. It came from the most unlikely source, Tiffany. I was surprised when I opened the hotel room door to see her standing there. She looked awful. No makeup, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, holding a Red Bull. She looked humbled, stripped of her pretenses. "What do you want?" I asked, blocking the doorway. "Marcus is a mess," she said, her voice raspy. "He's at a motel in Vallejo. He's drinking himself to death, Evelyn. He knows he ruined everything." "He did," I said coldly, "and you helped him." "I know," she whispered, looking down. "I was greedy. I wanted the lifestyle, but I didn't want this. I didn't want to lose the vineyard. I didn't want to destroy the family." She reached into her bag. "I stole something from the office before Julian's goons kicked us out." She handed me a USB drive. "What is this?" "It's Greg's private backup," she said. "I knew his password because Marcus and I used to snoop on his emails to see if you were changing the will. There are emails in there, Evelyn, between Greg and Julian Black, dating back 2 years." I snatched the drive. 2 years? "They've been planning this since before Marcus even took over," Tiffany said, tears welling in her eyes. "Greg fed Marcus the bad ideas, the yacht, the expansion, the loans. He groomed him to fail, so Julian could swoop in. And there's something else." "What?" "Julian isn't the top of the food chain. He's a front man. The emails mention a big boss, someone personal." I plugged the drive into Silas's laptop. We scanned the emails. Tiffany was right. It was a systematic dismantling of my empire. orchestrated from the inside. But the emails referred to the ultimate buyer only as the sommelier. Who is the sommelier? Silas said, squinting at the screen. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that nickname. Decades ago, when I was first starting out, there was a rival, a man named Arthur Sterling. We had a brief, volatile romance that ended when I caught him trying to sabotage my first harvest. I had destroyed his reputation, forced him out of the valley, and he had sworn revenge. I thought he had died or moved to Europe. Arthur, I whispered. He's alive. Sterling, Silas asked. The guy who runs the European conglomerate? I'm coming for my land, I said, the pieces falling into place. He doesn't want the money. He wants to pave over my life because I broke his heart 40 years ago. We have proof of conspiracy now, Silas said, typing furiously. We can file an injunction. We can stop the sale. An injunction takes weeks, I said, pacing the room. By then, he'll have bulldozed the vines. No, we need money. We need to pay the redemption price by Friday at 5 p.m. Today is Wednesday. We don't have 12 million. Evelyn? No, I said, a dangerous idea forming in my mind. But I know where Arthur keeps his skeleton keys. And turning to Tiffany, you want redemption, sweetie? You want to prove you're not just a gold-digging waste of space? Tiffany nodded vigorously. Yes, anything. You still have your keys to the wine cellar? The biometric ones? Yes. But Julian changed the codes. He changed the digital codes, I smiled, but he didn't change the manual override because only 2 people know where the physical key is hidden. Me and Marcus. What are we going to do? Silas asked, looking nervous. We are going to pull a heist, I said, grabbing my coat. There is a bottle in that wine cellar, a 1945 Romani Conti. It's not on the inventory list. Richard bought it at an auction in the 90s for cash. It's worth $500,000 on its own. But inside the false bottom of that wine crate is something worth a lot more. What is it? Tiffany asked. Diamonds. Uncut, conflict diamonds Richard accepted as payment from a South African distributor in the 80s when currency controls were tight. They've been sitting in the dark for 30 years, worth about $15 million in today's market. Silas's jaw dropped. You have $15 million in diamonds hidden in your basement and you didn't tell me?
Breaking into your own house is a surreal experience. It's like watching a movie of your life and rewind, except the soundtrack is your heart hammering against your ribs, and the audience is a squad of private security goons hired to throw you in jail. It was 2 a.m. on Friday morning. The fog had rolled in off the bay, thick and cold, blanketing the vineyard in a ghostly white haze. It was the perfect cover. We were parked a mile down the road in Carlos's battered pickup truck, me, Marcus, and Tiffany. Silas was back at the hotel, coordinating with a diamond broker in San Francisco who agreed to an emergency liquidation, assuming we actually survived the night. I can't do this, Marcus whispered, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He looked terrible. The detox from the last 2 days had left him shaky and pale, but at least his eyes were clear for the first time in years. I said, "You don't have a choice, Marcus," I said, touching the load on the taser Carlos had given me. "You broke this family, Marcus. Tonight, you help fix it. Now kill the lights." We moved on foot through the rows of Cabernet vines. The soil was soft and damp, muffling our footsteps. I knew this land better than I knew the lines on my own palms. I knew where the irrigation ditches were, where the motion sensors were triggered by deer, and exactly where the blind spots in the security cameras lay. Julian Black might have bought the debt, but he didn't buy the 40 years of knowledge I had of every square inch of this dirt. "Keep low," I hissed at Tiffany, whose designer sneakers were squelching in the mud. To her credit, she didn't complain. She was focused, her eyes scanning the perimeter. The threat of poverty had a way of sharpening her senses. We reached the north side of the main estate. The house was lit up like a fortress. Julian had stationed guards at the front gate and the patio, but he had neglected the old servants' entrance near the root cellar. It was a narrow, wooden door covered in ivy that hadn't been used since the 1980s. "The key won't work," Marcus whispered. "They rekeyed the whole perimeter." "This isn't a perimeter door," I whispered back, pulling a rusted iron key from a chain around my neck. "This is the original cellar access from 1975. It bypasses the digital security grid. Richard insisted on keeping it manual in case of power outages." I jammed the key into the lock. It groaned, stiff with age. I held my breath. If it snapped, we were done. I used both hands, twisting with every ounce of strength I had left. Click. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black staircase descending into the earth. The smell of damp oak and aging wine hit us, a smell that used to bring me comfort, but tonight smelled like danger. "Phone lights off," I commanded. "We go by feel. Tiffany, you watch the door. Marcus, you're with me." We descended into the dark. The wine cellar was a labyrinth of floor-to-ceiling racks holding millions of dollars of inventory. We moved slowly, guiding ourselves by touching the cool glass of the bottles. My heart was racing, but my mind was ice cold. We needed the 1945 Romani Conti crate. It was stored in row Z, a section Richard had built behind a false wall of empty barrels. "Did you hear that?" Marcus froze. Above us, heavy footsteps echoed on the floorboards. The security guards were patrolling the kitchen, directly overhead. Dust motes drifted down from the ceiling. We stood statue still, barely daring to breathe. "Clear, checking the perimeter," a muffled voice came from a radio upstairs. The footsteps moved away. "Move," I whispered. We made it to the back wall. I counted the barrels. 1, 2, 3. The fourth one was the trigger. I reached inside the hollow rim of the barrel and found the hidden latch. I pulled. The entire section of the wall swung inward, silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a small hidden tasting room Richard had built for his private collection. And there it was, the wooden crate, stamped with the French Vineyard seal, sitting on a velvet-covered pedestal. It looked innocent enough, just a box of old wine, but I knew better. "Grab it," I told Marcus. He stepped forward and lifted the crate. "It's heavy," I said. "Diamonds usually are. Let's go." We turned to leave, but as we stepped back into the main cellar, the lights suddenly blazed on. I squinted, blinded by the sudden glare. Standing at the top of the stairs, blocking our exit, was a man in a tactical vest holding a flashlight and a baton. He wasn't alone. 2 other guards flanked him. "Well, well, well," the lead guard sneered, speaking into his radio. "Mr. Black, we have intruders in the cellar. Looks like the former owners decided to do some late-night shopping." Marcus dropped the crate. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "Oh, God, we're dead." "Don't move," the guard shouted, starting down the stairs. I looked at Marcus. He was paralyzed with fear. I looked at the crate. Then I looked at the fire suppression system control panel on the wall next to me. It was an old halon gas system designed to suck the oxygen out of the room to stop a fire without damaging the wine labels. It was dangerous, outdated, and exactly what we needed. "Marcus, the mask," I screamed, grabbing the emergency breathing mask hanging by the panel. "What? Put it on!" I shoved the mask into his hands and slammed my palm against the big red button marked Emergency Purge. A klaxon wailed, deafeningly loud. Whoosh! Massive nozzles in the ceiling erupted, blasting white gas into the room with the force of a jet engine. The noise was incredible. The guards at the top of the stairs stumbled back, coughing and blindingly disoriented as the gas filled the stairwell. "Grab the crate!" I yelled, my voice muffled as I pulled my scarf over my nose and mouth. Marcus, acting on pure adrenaline, scooped up the crate. We didn't go up the stairs toward the guards. We ran deeper into the cellar towards the delivery chute. "Go, go!" I pushed Marcus towards the inclined conveyor belt used for loading cases. It led up to the loading dock in the back. He scrambled up the metal slide, shoving the crate ahead of him. I followed, my lungs burning despite the scarf. We burst out of the chute and onto the cool concrete of the loading dock, gasping for air. The alarm was blaring across the entire estate now. Floodlights were sweeping the grounds. "The truck," Tiffany screamed. She had driven Carlos's truck around the back when the alarm started, acting on instinct. She screeched to a halt, the passenger door flying open. "Get in!" Marcus threw the crate into the truck bed and dove into the back seat. I scrambled into the passenger seat just as the guards burst out the rear exit, guns drawn. "Drive!" I shouted. Tiffany slammed on the gas, the tire spun in the gravel, kicking up a cloud of dust, and the truck fishtailed wildly before finding traction. A bullet pinged off the tailgate, but we were moving. We tore through the vineyard rows, smashing through a wooden fence and careening onto the main road. We drove in silence for 5 miles, putting distance between us and the estate. My heart was pounding a techno beat in my chest. "Did we get it?" Tiffany asked, her voice trembling, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "Pull over," I said. She pulled into a dark lay-by. Marcus reached through the back window and hauled the crate into the cab. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the crowbar I handed him. "Open it." He pried the lid off. Inside, nestled in straw, were 12 bottles of 1945 Romani Conti. "It's just wine," Marcus whispered, looking like he was about to vomit. "Mom, it's just wine. We risked prison for wine." "Lift the false bottom, you idiot," I snapped. He pulled the wooden divider out. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather pouch. He opened the drawstring and poured the contents into his hand. Even in the dim dashboard light, they blazed. Dozens of uncut diamonds, rough and heavy, looking like chunks of frozen fire. "Holy shit," Tiffany breathed. "I don't celebrate yet," I said, checking my watch. "It's 4:30 a.m. We have the rocks, but we need $12 million in cash deposited into the foreclosure escrow account by 5 p.m. today. And we are currently driving a stolen truck, wanted by the police, and holding illicit gems that no reputable buyer will touch." "Silas said he had a buyer," Marcus said, staring at the diamonds. "He does," I said grimly. "But the buyer is in San Francisco, and Julian Black knows we have the diamonds now. He'll have every highway into the city watched. He doesn't want to arrest us, Marcus. If the cops catch us, the diamonds go into evidence, and we miss the deadline. Julian wins. He's going to send mercenaries to intercept us before we reach the bridge." I looked at the road ahead. The sun was starting to crack the horizon. "Buckle up," I said. "The heist was the easy part. Now we have to run the gauntlet." The Golden Gate Bridge loomed in the distance, shrouded in mist, but the flashing red and blue lights blocking the on-ramp told me our luck had just run out. It wasn't the police. It was a private blockade. 2 black SUVs were parked horizontally across the lanes, men in suits standing by with crossed arms. Julian Black wasn't taking any chances. He knew we had to cross the bay to get to the buyer in San Francisco, and he had choked the only vein connecting us to salvation. "We're trapped," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the dashboard. "They're going to ram us if we try to run that. It's over, Mom. It's over." "Stop whining," I snapped. My eyes darted to the GPS. "We aren't crossing the bridge. We're going under it." "What?" Tiffany asked, gripping the grab handle as I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending the truck careening down a service road marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "I didn't spend 40 years shipping wine globally without making friends at the docks," I gritted out. "Call Silas, tell him to meet us at Pier 39, not the office, and tell him to bring the buyer to the boat." We tore through the chain-link fence of the marina, the truck bouncing violently. I could see the headlights of Julian's mercenaries in the rearview mirror, gaining on us. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. One of the SUVs clipped our bumper, sending us spinning into a row of empty boat trailers. "Hold on!" I screamed. I floored the gas, correcting the spin. We screeched onto the wooden pier, the tires smoking. At the end of the dock, a beat-up fishing trawler named the Rusty Grape was idling. Captain Mike, a man I'd bailed out of debt in the 90s, was waving frantically. We didn't even stop. I slammed the brakes at the very edge of the pier, and we bailed out of the truck just as the black SUV skidded to a halt behind us. "Get on the boat!" I shoved Marcus and Tiffany. We jumped the gap onto the deck just as Captain Mike gunned the engines. The trawler surged forward, churning white foam. Julian's men stood on the dock, helpless, watching us slip away into the foggy bay. I stood at the stern and flipped them the bird. It was undignified, childish, and absolutely satisfying. The crossing took 40 agonizing minutes. Every wave that hit the hull felt like precious seconds ticking away. It was 3:30 p.m. We had 90 minutes to sell $15 million in diamonds, get the cash, and wire it to the foreclosure escrow account before the 5 p.m. deadline. When we docked at Pier 39, Silas was waiting in a black sedan with an older Asian man who looked like a librarian but smelled like money, Mr. Wu. "Show me," Mr. Wu said, not wasting time on pleasantries. We huddled in the back of the sedan. Marcus poured the diamonds onto the leather seat. Mr. Wu pulled out a loop and a digital scale. The silence was suffocating. 3:45 p.m., 3:50 p.m. Rough cut, old conflict stones. Hard to trace, but harder to cut. 10 million. 15, I countered instantly, or I walk into the jewelry exchange and start a bidding war. 12, Wu said, without looking up. Cash, today, wired to any account you want. 13.5, I said, staring him down, and you provide the police escort to the bank. Wu looked at me, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Done? He made a call. 4:15 p.m. The wire hit Silas's laptop screen. Funds received. Drive, I commanded. We tore through the streets of San Francisco. Mr. Wu's police escort turned out to be 2 off-duty motorcycle cops who cut through traffic like Moses parting the Red Sea. But San Francisco traffic is a beast that doesn't care about your deadlines. 4:45 p.m. We were 6 blocks away. 4:50 p.m. 3 blocks. 4:55 p.m. We screeched to a halt in front of the First National Bank Tower. I didn't wait for the door to open. I scrambled out, my knees popping, and sprinted. Marcus and Tiffany were right behind me. We hit the revolving doors at 57 p.m. The receptionist looked up startled by the 3 disheveled people bursting into the lobby, me with mud on my coat, Marcus looking like a recovering junkie, and Tiffany with twigs in her hair. "Escrow department," I yelled. "Room 402. We hit the elevator button. Nothing. It was slow. "Stairs," Marcus yelled. We ran up 4 flights. My lungs were burning, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. I was 70 years old running up a skyscraper to save my life. We burst through the double doors of the conference room at 4:59. The scene was like a painting of corporate greed. Julian Black was sitting at the head of the table, a gold pen hovering over a stack of documents. Opposite him sat the bank manager, looking bored. "Stop," I wheezed, bracing myself against the doorframe. Julian looked up, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before returning. "Miss Vance, you're too late. The deadline is 5 p.m. It is now," he checked his Patek Philippe watch, 4:59 and 30 seconds. "Unless you have $12 million in your pocket, get out." "I don't have it in my pocket," I said, walking to the table and slamming Silas's laptop down on top of the deed. I hit the refresh button on the escrow account page projected on the screen. Balance, $13.5 million. Status, cleared. The room went silent. The bank manager adjusted his glasses, looked at the screen, and then at the clock. The second hand ticked past the 12, 5 p.m. The funds were verified at 4:58 p.m. The right of redemption is exercised. The foreclosure is canceled. The property remains with Vance Land Holdings. Julian Black's face went from smug to ash gray. He stood up slowly,
his fists clenched. "This isn't over. The debt is paid," I interrupted, my voice regaining its steel, "in full, including your predatory interest rates and penalties. Now get out of my chair." Julian glared at me, his eyes filled with venom that promised future retaliation. He pulled out his phone to make a call. "Don't bother calling Arthur," I said softly. Julian froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Arthur Sterling," I said, stepping into his personal space. "Tell the sommelier that his vintage is spoiled. Tell him that if he ever come near my land, my family, or my wine again, I won't just buy him out. I will burn his European conglomerate to the ground using the dirt he's been hiding in the Cayman Islands since 1995. Yes, I know about that too." Julian swallowed hard. He snapped his briefcase shut and stormed out of the room without a word. The heavy door swung shut, leaving only the sound of our heavy breathing. Marcus collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Tiffany slid down the wall to the floor, laughing hysterically. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. We had won. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass, I saw a different woman. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. "So," Marcus said, looking up with a hopeful puppy dog expression, "we did it. We're back in business. When do I get my office back?" I turned slowly. The room went cold. "You don't," I said. Marcus's smile faded. "What? But we saved the company." "No, I saved the company. You and your wife broke it. You betrayed me, you stole from me, and you showed me that you are weak." "But we helped you with the diamonds," Tiffany protested, "and that is the only reason you're not going to prison. Here is the new deal. I am the CEO, I am the sole owner. Marcus, you are fired from management. If you want a job, you can report to Carlos at 5 a.m. tomorrow. You'll be pruning vines and scrubbing vats for minimum wage. You start at the bottom." "You can't be serious," Marcus stammered. "Dead serious. And Tiffany, we need a new receptionist. The hours are 9 to 5, and if I catch you looking at a catalog on company time, you're out. You want the lifestyle? You earn it, dollar by dollar." They looked at each other, stunned, stripping away the entitlement layer by layer. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom. Okay. I'll be there at 5. "Good," I said, picking up my purse. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a harvest to plan, and I need to buy a new lock for the wine cellar." I walked out of the bank and into the cool evening air. They say you can't teach old dogs new tricks, but they forget one thing. Old dogs are the only ones who know where the bones are buried, and if you try to take my bone, I'll bite your hand off. Don't mess with the elderly. We've survived longer than you for a reason.